Shalom, my name is Todd Bennett, and I want to talk to you about a very important subject today, knowing the will of God for your life. Now, that's a question that many people ask, and I hear it a lot, and of course, it's very important because we all want to know exactly what we're supposed to be doing here on this earth. And if you believe in God, the God of the Bible, then you really should be asking yourself that question. And I've done another teaching on the kingdom. If you think you're in the kingdom, then you really want to know how you fit into that kingdom and what the king's will is for you in that kingdom. Well, first of all, I would suggest getting to know him a little better. And I say that because the very question itself, knowing the will of God for your life, kind of uses a title that's not too correct. God is actually the name, it derives from a Teutonic god, Teutonic religions, pagan religions, and it's really not a good title to describe the creator of the universe. In Hebrew, we read Elohim. And so I would suggest you use Elohim instead of a pagan title that's used and derives from pagan origins. Also, Elohim has a name, which has been provided almost 7,000 times in the Hebrew scriptures. Sadly, though, that name has been replaced by the title, the Lord. So if you read an English Bible, every time you read the Lord, it's actually covering up the true name of the Creator, spelled Yod-He-Vav-He. Now, some people pronounce it Yahweh. I believe it's more properly pronounced Yahuwah. All right, so that's the name of the Father, and the name of the Son is also a Hebrew name, Yahushua. Okay, now Christianity has developed a tradition calling him Jesus, but that's impossible. Can't be his name. There's no J in the Hebrew language. There was no J in the Greek or the Aramaic or the Latin. No names when Messiah, or no languages when Messiah walked the earth had the letter J. It's in English. It derives from the English language about 400 or 500 years ago, and Jesus is essentially an English name. But we don't call people by we don't translate names. In other words, we don't say, well, Yahushua was his Hebrew name, but it translates into English as Jesus. That's not how we deal with names. Funny thing, for some reason, people tend to call me Scott sometimes, and it's not just a one-time event. It happens an awful lot. And, whenever I hear that, it kind of sends a chill up your spine. I mean, when somebody calls you by the wrong name, it kind of touches on a nerve. And the same holds true with our Creator. I mean, he has a name. He's provided that name for us. We don't translate names into other languages. We transliterate them. Okay. For instance, the name of the Messiah, Yahushua, the English Bibles actually translate that very same Hebrew name as Joshua. Okay. But again, it can't be Joshua because there's no J in the Hebrew language. So the patriarch that we call Joshua, his name was Yahushua, exact same name of the Messiah. So I suggest the first thing we do if you want to know the will of Elohim for your life is you start using his correct name. He appreciates that. And how can you really have a relationship with somebody if you don't even know their name? I mean, even on a level, man to man, man to woman, friendship-wise, if we don't know somebody's name, we really can't claim to have a very strong relationship with them. Knowing somebody's name is really the starting point in a relationship of getting to know them. So I highly recommend that you start using proper titles and proper names, getting to know the Creator of the universe and his Son, the Messiah. Now, the second thing that I would advise is getting to know his instructions. He actually provides his instructions on how to live. I mean, we know that man and the woman were ejected from the garden because they disobeyed the commandments. They were in paradise. They would have been able to stay in paradise if they followed his commandments. And the reason for that is he is a holy Elohim, a set-apart Elohim. And we have to conduct ourselves with appropriate conduct if we want to draw near to him, if we want to dwell with him. All right? So that's what the commandments are for. They are instructions in righteousness. And actually the Hebrew word Torah, that's what it means. It means instructions in righteousness. It shows us the way that we're to live, and then we're supposed to move in that way and walk in that way. All right. Now, many English Bibles translate the Hebrew word Torah as the law, and of course that gives a very different impression. And there's been many false teachings that actually tell people that, oh, if you follow the commandments, you're legalistic and you're putting yourself under the law, as if it's a bad thing to follow these instructions for righteousness. That's a lie that drives straight back from the garden. And I would highly advise that you reject that immediately. Start looking at the commandments as instructions in righteousness and start following those commandments that apply to you. They obviously don't all apply to everybody. There's instructions for men and women, there's instructions for priests, and there's instructions for parents, and so on and so forth. We read those instructions and we follow those instructions that apply to us. In fact, it was very clear when the early disciples were dealing with this issue of Gentiles, those that didn't follow the commandments, those that were pagans. They wanted to start coming into the faith. They gave very specific advice, and we read about that in Acts 15, 18 through 21, where James said, "Known to Elohim from eternity are all his works. Therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to Elohim, but that we write to them to abstain from things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from things strangled, and from blood. For Moses has had throughout many generations those who preach him in every city, being read in the synagogues every Shabbat." So what they were doing was saying, well, we can't overwhelm these people with all the commandments all at once. And one of the big issues was, should they be circumcised before they come into the faith or not? And of course, circumcision in that day was a very complex ritual full of traditions and such. And the Pharisees had kind of added to the Torah and taken away from the Torah and made it a big situation full of tradition that they wanted these Gentiles to follow in order to be in the faith. And so that was kind of the debate that was going on in Acts 15. And James essentially said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to give them some very basic instructions. And those instructions were really directed at getting them out of their pagan temple tradition and get them cleaned up so that they could then do what? Get into the synagogue, fellowship with the Israelites who were hearing the Torah. Moses refers to the Torah that's read in the synagogues, and it's every Shabbat. And that leads us to our next pointer here, and that is keeping his scheduled appointments. All right, the scriptures provide us very special times that we're supposed to be meeting with the Creator. One of them is Shabbat, and it occurs every seventh day. That's when we're supposed to be resting. It's a pattern that's continued straight from the first week of creation, when the Creator worked for 6 days and then rested on the Sabbath, the seventh day. He set that example for all of us. We're supposed to be like Him. Again, the commandments are so that we can be righteous like our Creator is righteous and set apart. And so He set that very important example the first week of creation. He worked 6 days. He rested on the seventh. We're supposed to be doing the same thing. And when we rest and focus on Him and live out that act of obedience, it's actually a sign. It's a sign to the whole world. Hey, we're not going to work on this day. We're not going to do our own pleasures this day because we follow the set apart Elohim of Yisrael, the Creator of the universe. So it's actually a visible sign that we carry with us when we rest on the seventh day. And there's blessings associated with that. Not only physical blessings that our bodies get to rest, but also spiritual blessings that we can then take that time to focus on our Creator, His instructions. We can learn about Him, we can pray, and again, we can discern His will as we're actually doing His will. It is His will that we rest every seventh day. So again, if you want to know His will for your life, I suggest, resting on the seventh day. And then after Leviticus 23 talks about the Sabbath, it also talks about certain important appointed times called Moedim. Those are more scheduled appointments that we're supposed to be doing with the Creator. Now, when there was a temple and He dwelled with the Israelites in Jerusalem, there were certain prescribed things that they would do. They would bring their first fruit offerings to Him, and there were special sacrifices that would be made. There's no temple now, so we don't do that, but I go to Jerusalem and I rehearse these things because that's what they're called. They're called Kadosh Mikra. They're set-apart rehearsals. And the reason they're rehearsals because there's prophetic fulfillments built into them. Many people are searching out for, what's going to happen in the future, and they study prophecy. Well, you really can't understand prophecy unless you understand the Moedim, because Elohim fulfills his promises within the context of these appointed times. So they provide actually a framework for his will for this earth and for his people. So when we actually follow these times and recognize these times and keep these scheduled appointed times, then we're actually, again, in his will, and we're rehearsing for his future fulfillment of these events. So these are really important for you to get involved with. Many people think they're Jewish holidays. They're not Jewish holidays at all. In fact, the Leviticus 23, he specifically says these are my appointed times, okay? So they're his appointed times. They don't belong to Jews or anybody else. They belong to him. So if you want to get to know him, fellowship with him, and keep appointments with him, and be in covenant with him, then I suggest that you keep his times. And then beyond that, I suggest that we look to what Yeshua said about his final judgment, because he really gave us the real key to how we should be living our lives here on earth. In Matthew 25, 31 through 40, he specifically describes how he's going to judge the righteous, and then beyond that, the wicked, but we'll just focus on the righteous right now. And he says, when the Son of Man comes in his esteem, and all the set-apart angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his esteem. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Master, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. So there he sets forth the conduct that he expects from his sheep, from the righteous ones. He expects us to be doing his will to those around us, searching out the needy, and giving them the blessings and the help that we can give them. So those are just some pointers for getting in and knowing the will of Elohim. Again, knowing his name and using his name, following his ways, keeping his scheduled times, and then doing the conduct that he expects us to do while we're here on earth. So I hope that helps you and gets you some guidance in the right direction. I recommend that you get our books and look at our teachings. Check out our website, www.shemayisrael.net. And until next time, shalom.